For previous festive installments, we have examined a variety of unsolved crimes and murders, all of which took place over the Christmas period. For this year's episode, we will be exploring a disappearance that took place in the American state of Nevada. An enduring mystery in which substantial evidence was uncovered and made accessible, yet provided little assistance to the investigators. The story of a man who became lost in Las Vegas. Those assigned to the challenging task of finding a missing person often face their toughest challenges in cases devoid of any traceable evidence that could aid the investigation. In these instances, individuals seem to have vanished without a trace, leaving behind no indicators of preparation or clues regarding the manner of their departure. With the advancement and increased availability of technology to the general public, the information it offers has become a crucial aspect of missing persons cases. And yet, despite such invaluable data as call records and GPS location services being seemingly advantageous for investigators, in a minority of cases, they can paradoxically work against the intended benefit. The electronic output of the missing person's phone or computer can often be too limited, or too open to interpretation to help in developing a working hypothesis for what has taken place. The most recent and high-profile example of this is the case of missing British housewife Nicola Bulley, who disappeared after last being seen walking her dog along a river footpath. When her phone was found unlocked and still active on a nearby bench, social media commentators and contributors immediately began to circulate wild theories of foul play. They quickly declared the matter a murder or kidnapping, prompting some viewers to breach police cordons and interfere with search operations, attempting to will their own speculations into existence. Ultimately, this only added more emotional torment for her family, with no actual evidence that a crime had even taken place, but still having lost their loved one under some tragic circumstance, whatever that circumstance may have been. The misleading and uncertain nature of such evidence is also true of a case from the US state of Nevada, which occurred in December of 2009. On the afternoon of the 17th of December, the Las Vegas Police Department was contacted by a woman named Koecher, who wanted to report her son missing. Having gone on to record the necessary details, investigators did not initially anticipate that there would be anything in the way of aggravating factors connected to the case. The department received an average of 300 such reports every month, with the vast majority of the tourists and visitors involved eventually being found alive and well. But as the case unfolded, with evidence from several sources coming under examination, it became increasingly difficult to construct a viable hypothesis in relation to what had occurred. 30-year-old Stephen Koecher didn't have any tangible links to the city of Las Vegas, having been born and raised in Texas and spending the majority of his adult life living and working in Utah. He had no known issues with alcohol or substance abuse, and was not known to the police in relation to any crime, largely as a result of his Mormon upbringing. A former missionary who had worked for a period of time in Brazil, he assisted with leading services at his local church and helped to organize charity events for those in need. He presented as a happy and helpful personality who was very close to the other members of his tight-knit family, as well as the wider community. The only negative factor investigators could find in Stephen's background was that the economic downturn in the wake of the 2008 banking crisis had rendered him unemployed for some time. Acting upon the information provided by his mother, officers were dispatched to a quiet cul-de-sac located in the city's southern Henderson district. There, they found Stephen's Chevrolet Cavalier parked up and unattended at the side of the road, with no obvious signs of damage or having been interfered with. The estate where the car had been parked was part of a retirement village complex, prompting questions as to why it was at that particular location. Inquiries with residents revealed that the Chevrolet had been present in the road since the afternoon of December the 13th, and that nobody had been seen either inside or in the vicinity of the car. CCTV footage from a camera in the street showed Stephen parking up just before midday on that date, before exiting and securing the vehicle. He was smartly dressed, apparently holding a sheaf of papers, or possibly a file of some kind, in one hand, before then walking up the road and out of shot of the camera. Several minutes later, a second camera on an adjacent road captured his reflection, walking out of the northern end of the estate, but no other footage of him was to be found. Police informed Deanne that it had still only been a relatively short period of time since her son had been missing, but nevertheless began the process of examining his finances and telephone records. However, they soon came to realise that none of these inquiries were going to assist in any way whatsoever regarding the whereabouts of the missing man. It did not take long for investigators to retrieve the electronic data from Stephen's mobile phone, which had remained active for 48 hours after he had last been seen. But what they discovered was immediately puzzling, failing to generate the lines of inquiry they had anticipated and which they had promised Stephen's mother would be forthcoming. Contained within the report compiled by the service provider were 3 GPS signals, all of which suggested Stephen had continued on a northerly journey after leaving his vehicle. The first of these had been received by a phone mast situated at a junction of 2 roads, Arroyo Grande Boulevard and American Pacific Drive, 5 hours after Stephen was last seen. This location was situated 10 miles to the northeast of where the Chevrolet had been parked up. 2 hours later, at around 7 PM, the phone had been picked up again by another mast sited a further 2 miles to the north, not far from Whitney Ranch. The final handshake from Stephen's device had taken place the following morning, in the vicinity of an intersection between US Route 93 and Russell Road. The phone signal had then continued to emit from somewhere near to this final location for the remainder of the 2 days before it then terminated. During this time, the handset was used to open a text message from Stephen's landlord and to access the voicemail account, before the battery had then apparently run down. Frustratingly, at all 3 locations, there was an absence of CCTV footage that might have determined if Stephen had been on foot at the time or had been travelling in a vehicle. With all inquiries into the aftermath of the disappearance having now run their course, investigators turned their attention to digital evidence from the days leading up to the event. Analysis of the phone's GPS data was compared with Stephen's bank records, and then followed up with statements from all those that he had interacted with. The picture that was in turn generated by these inquiries only proved to undermine any of the possible scenarios the detectives had been working towards. In the days and weeks leading up to his disappearance, Stephen Koecher had made repeated road trips across the lengths and breadths of both Utah and Nevada. When presented with these locations, His family could not find any obvious connections behind any of the places he had been visiting, with the route taken presenting as almost random in nature. The vast distances travelled also made little sense, with Stephen having little money as a result of being unemployed, but apparently spending what he did have on fuel for these journeys. During the 48 hours before he had vanished, Stephen had racked up more than 1,100 miles, travelling between Salt Lake City, West Wendover, and Mesquite. There was no suggestion that he had planned to leave his home for any significant amount of time, having committed to a family party and to lead a local church sermon over the holidays. Throughout that period, he had made no reference in regards to these trips to the people he interacted with, offering different excuses depending on who he spoke to. At one point, he had unexpectedly visited the home of an ex-girlfriend, staying there for lunch with her family when he found that she was not present. When asked where he was heading at the end of the meal, he had informed his hosts that he was going to Sacramento to visit family. But during a similar phone conversation with his mother later that same day, Stephen had instead referred to having made inquiries into a potential job he had applied for. The only consistent element between all statements recorded by officers was that Stephen had presented as untroubled and rational to the people he had spoken to, showing no signs of having been in any distress or danger, and not asking for anything in the way of help or financial assistance. Despite employing the techniques which had proven successful in resolving other such lengthy missing persons investigations, the police were never able to locate Stephen. Searches of his home and vehicle were carried out using drugs and firearms dogs, none of which indicated any evidence of foul play. There followed a series of press appeals and interviews with his family on national television programs, with no further lines of inquiry being generated. Several searches of the area where his phone had last been detected also took place over the years, failing to uncover any indication that he had been physically present. Thorough examinations of Stephen's home computer and written diaries found no evidence that he had been in crisis or planning to end his life. A check of his car found it to still be half-fueled, indicating he had been planning to return home, with items inside apparently purchased as Christmas gifts for his family. His mother and siblings have maintained their belief that he had travelled to Las Vegas in order to find work, citing his smart attire at the time as being indicative of attending a job interview. And yet, no evidence of this could be found on Stephen's computer or phone, or after speaking with the owners and management staff of local businesses in and around the place he disappeared. It is therefore perhaps natural that those who have since looked into the matter have maintained that the missing man must have fallen victim to an unexpected mishap. There was either a fatal accident or crime-related incident within a certain radius of where he left his vehicle, which had been missed by the general public or covered up by the perpetrator. This means that Stephen's remains must have been removed from the scene by whoever was responsible and then concealed elsewhere, most likely a remote location, given that nothing was found in the vicinity of where his mobile phone signal had last been detected. In the years that followed, there was much speculation linking the event to another high-profile disappearance. The week before his trip to Las Vegas, a woman named Susan Powell had gone missing from her home in a quiet and unassuming suburb of Salt Lake City. For a long time, her husband Joshua Powell was suspected of having murdered her, acting upon his notion that she was involved in an extramarital affair. Despite significant evidence that he had killed her and concealed her body, Joshua was questioned on the matter, but never arrested. He subsequently went on to take his own life in 2012. Joshua's family would later suggest that Koecher visited Salt Lake City as it was he who was having the affair with Susan, and that the pair had eloped, framing Joshua for her murder. But despite this theory having gained some traction in a number of online forums, there has never been any evidence that Stephen or Susan had ever met one another. It is the existence of so many oppositional factors in the case of Stephen Koecher that makes it so difficult to formulate a viable explanation for what could have taken place. The missing person was not only law-abiding and deeply religious, but additionally so connected to his family and community that it doesn't make sense for him to simply up and leave. There is also the mystery of how such a significant amount of digital evidence was readily available, providing a high degree of detail surrounding his movements both before and after he was last seen, none of which seems to have assisted the investigation in any way. The urban area in which Stephen was last seen and apparently passed through was filled with potential CCTV evidence, but nothing had been captured. This suggests that either he went to great efforts to prepare for and then stage his disappearance, or that whatever happened to him was completely unplanned and unexpected. With the passage of time and the lack of any traction gained from subsequent revisits to the investigation, it is increasingly unlikely that this mystery will ever be solved. The only hope that remains is that as the outlying areas and infrastructure of Las Vegas continue to expand into the surrounding wilderness, further clues may be found, either items that can be identified as having belonged to Stephen Koecher, or the remains of the missing man himself. Ultimately, this would provide some final clarity on how and why such a beloved member of his family and community could be lost under such senseless circumstances. We can only hope that Stephen is either found alive and well, or that his family eventually receives the closure they so desperately need.
Time's